we are going to go ahead and get started, and I apologize again for the delay. Give me just 1 second to pull this back up so I can get Molly's bio. All right, we are so very happy to welcome Molly McKenzie, who is a managing attorney at Southeast Louisiana Legal Services in the Family Law Unit. She has been with Southeast Louisiana Legal Services since 2016, working exclusively on family law cases in Orleans and Jefferson parishes, with a particular focus on domestic violence matters and serving immigrant victims of abuse, and maybe immortal victims of abuse too, but we'll talk about that later. So,
Yes,
Molly,
I do not have any vampire clients at the moment, but I did appreciate the typo.
Molly, just as a quick recap, we are going to be recording this and hosting it on the forum's website. We will have folks who can join in and may ask questions at the end, but if you want to go ahead and share your screen, you can get started.
Sure. Thank you. All right. Okay, so hopefully y'all can see that. So as just said, my name is Molly McKenzie. I am the managing attorney of the Family Law Unit in the New Orleans office of Southeast Louisiana Legal Services. So, SLLS is a civil legal aid provider in Louisiana. So, we provide free legal services and representation to folks who are low income and have limited resources. So, we cover a whole wide range of different types of civil legal issues, but we are going to be talking family law today. Um, of course, the disclaimer, as all attorneys love. What I am going to be providing today is legal information. This is not legal advice. I cannot provide any legal advice during this presentation. Um, the only advice I can give is that it is always best to speak to a lawyer about your issue, particularly on some of the more complex family law issues. When it comes to custody and it comes to affiliation, things can get very complicated. So it is always in your best interest to talk to a lawyer who specializes in those areas. I am going to provide a list of resources at the end. We are lucky in Louisiana that we have a lot of information available online for folks who are representing themselves or maybe don't know where to start. So I'll give some of those options at the end. So this is going to be an very surface level presentation. Normally, I spend at least an hour, hour and a half on each of these different issues whenever I'm presenting. So this is going to be a quick one, but I do want to just cover the basics. So we'll talk about custody, divorce, affiliation and adoption, and domestic violence. So going straight into it, with custody, this is talking about child custody. So custody for children who are below the age of 18. There are two different pieces to this. One piece is the physical custody. The other piece is the legal custody. So physical custody is about who has the child when. What kind of schedule do we have? Is it a week on, week off schedule where we alternate on every Sunday? Is it a 2-2-3 schedule that's a little more complicated but gives more frequent access to both parents? Or is it like an every other weekend type of schedule? All of these are very common in this state, although there is a preference. There is now actually a default in the law. This just went into effect recently from this most recent legislative session that says that 50-50 on the physical time is the default. That is preferred unless it is not feasible or if it's not in the child's best interest. The physical custody can also cover, who's got which holidays and birthdays. Usually you end up kind of alternating those. Legal custody is a different beast. It is about who has the authority to make decisions for the child. So those decisions include school and education, extracurriculars, medical decisions, vaccinations, medications, surgeries. It can include religion. It can include psychiatric care. All of these things that are part of parenting, who has the authority to make those decisions. And there are only two types of legal custody in Louisiana. There is joint custody and there is sole custody. Joint custody is by far the most common. It is the default also under the law. Joint custody, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a 50-50 split, although that is the default when it comes to time. But with joint custody, there's an expectation of co-parenting. They really want parents to work together to try to reach decisions for their children that are in the best interest of the children with both parents on board with it. The idea is cooperation. So that is the goal always with this. There are tools for that help with co-parenting. Sometimes parents are not the best at communicating with each other, so there are co-parenting apps that you can use to communicate with the other parent and share information, have all the schedules and everything in one place. I think you can also send money through some of them for child support. So there are some tools available, and there's also a list of guidelines that really lay out. They're very common to see in a co-parenting order that lay out kind of what your expectations are as a co-parent. Sole custody is a lot less common, but essentially means that one parent has the authority to make all the decisions. It does not mean that the other parent doesn't see the child, though, because again, physical and legal are separate. I'm not going to read through all of these because we do not have time. But the overarching consideration in all custody matters is going to be the best interest of the child. So the courts want to try and determine what is in the best interest, and these 14 factors are provided by the law to help kind of get at that. So these are not, it's not something where they're going to plug in, who wins on each one and it spits out an answer on who should have custody. But they are things that the court will consider. So they're good to know about, if you're approaching going into a custody battle or even not a battle, if you're just trying to figure out what makes sense for your family. Moving on to divorce. This is just some terminology. So divorce is the legal dissolution of a marriage through a judicial order. So it always has to go through a court. And the way that you start that paperwork is with a petition. So the petition is what kicks off the case. And it is possible to do these on your own, which is why I have this next one, which is a self-represented litigant. That is someone who is representing him or herself in their legal case. Divorce are probably one of the most common types of cases that we see folks representing themselves because it is very doable, especially if you're doing one of those simpler types of divorce. Um, there are self-help forms, which are fillable forms that are accepted by courts um, as well as self-help desks at some jurisdictions. So this is going to depend, on where you're living, what parish you're in, whether your court has these resources available. But there has been a lot of progress in the last, 10, 20 years with making it possible for people to file these things on their own because family law matters affect everybody. It is pretty much impossible to get through life without being touched by a family law matter in some way. Um, Ancillary matters, that is just the term that we use to talk about supplemental things that kind of go along with your main issue. So in this context, that could be custody, divvying up the property. Louisiana is a community property state. So things are co-owned for the most part. So you have to kind of divide it up when the marriage ends. Child support and spousal support, other financial issues can also be part of it. So that all can fall under the umbrella of divorce. The types of divorce that we have, so they're broken into two categories. The no-fault divorces, that is essentially saying, irreconcilable differences, we're going our separate ways. A fault-based divorce is where one spouse is blaming the other spouse in a very specific way for the breakdown of the marriage. So, no-fault divorces are by far the most common. They are the quickest, simplest, cheapest, easiest. They are, again, kind of the defaults. Fault-based divorces, you can see the four types we have here. There's one based on adultery. There's one based on felony. So that means that this one of the spouses has been convicted of a felony during the marriage and has been sentenced to at least a year in prison for that offense. The next one is for domestic violence, that is talking physical or sexual abuse. And then the last one is for protective order. If you obtain a protective order, and there are a few different types that I'll talk about later. If you obtain a protective order to protect yourself or any of the children during the marriage, then that could entitle you to a quicker divorce. Those, again, are not nearly as common. What we usually see are the no faults. So there's two types. This is massively simplified, but it at least kind of gets the gist across. So a 1031 divorce, and these are all just coming from their actual number in the civil code. So we just call them by their number. So a 1031 is the most common. That is where the spouses have to live separate and apart for the required period. Separate and apart means in different houses, under different roofs. It can't be living in separate bedrooms in the same house. You have to be in separate homes. So living separate and apart for the required time and then filing for the divorce and getting it confirmed pretty quickly. The 102 is where you essentially file and then live separate and apart for the required time and confirm your divorce at the end of the separation period. Um, that separation period, again, you have to be in separate homes. You can't reconcile, so you can't be going back together, not totally sure if you want to be done with the marriage. That can mess up your waiting period. If there are no minor children of the marriage, then it's a 180-day or 6-month waiting period. If there are minor children of the marriage, then it is a 365-day, a full year of living separate and apart before you would be entitled to confirm either of these. So, next, we are going to get into kind of the stickier parts of the law. Affiliation, this is the legal term of art in Louisiana, but this is talking about the legal and biological relationship. In this context, really, we're talking legal, the legal relationship between a child and their parent. Um, this is basically, creating that legal tie between parent and child. You have to have those legal ties in place for any of the custody stuff that I was talking about earlier to apply to be able to get custody of a child um, based on them being your child. You have to have the legal tie. So Louisiana's laws are very archaic when it comes to this issue. There's a whole bunch of them. They do not cover every scenario that arises in reality. A lot of these laws are built under the assumption that every child that's being born is being born of a marriage between a man and a woman, and that is just not reality. So there are a lot of kind of gaps and questions when it comes to affiliation in the state, particularly when we're talking about situations involving, same-sex parents. Um, the general presumptions, though, that do still stand here are that there is a presumption of maternity in favor of the person who gives birth to a child. So if you were in the hospital, you give birth to a child, you are going to be presumed to be the mother. There is a paternity presumption in favor of the husband of the mother. This can get complicated in many ways, but it does mean that, even with like with a man and a woman, if they're married and then they split up, but they never actually divorce, it could be, 10 years later, if if the wife gives birth, that child is technically supposed to be presumed to be fathered by the husband, even if they haven't seen each other in 10 years. So there's a lot of things like this that just don't quite make sense logically. The common sense answer is not always going to be the answer in the law when it comes to all of this. So there are a lot of other scenarios that exist. Unfortunately, there's not enough time to go through all of them, but just to cover a few things here. Um, Obviously, Obergefell which is the 2015 Supreme Court decision that legalized same-sex marriage in the US, including in Louisiana, changed a lot with how marriages and family law and custody are viewed in and how the laws work in Louisiana. One of those changes is that now on a birth certificate, instead of just saying mother and father for like where the names get put in, it now says mother slash parent and then father slash parent. So if you have a same-sex couple where one of the spouses gives birth to the child, the other spouse other spouse could be seen to be presumed to be the father. It gets complicated because the wording that we have on the birth certificates now, where it has parent, that is not necessarily reflected in the laws. Um, so while you can now generally put both of the parents' names on there if it's a situation where, let's say it's two women and one of the women gives birth and the other woman is, intended to be the parent. Both are intended to be the parents. You can put both of those names on the birth certificate if they are legally married. That is not necessarily foolproof to protect your parental rights, though. Some of the reasons for that is number one, we unfortunately, Obergefell could be on shaky ground. As much as I hate to say it, we don't know what's going to happen in the next session of SCOTUS. So it's good to be thinking ahead just in case. There's also concerns about, if you're traveling to other countries or going to other states, you really want to have some kind of court order or something more official than just a birth certificate to show that you are the parent. Um, you want to be able to protect your rights and protect your kids' rights. So that can include, your ability to make decisions for your child, including in emergency situations. You want to have access to your child, if they're in the hospital or, through the school. It can also affect your property and assets as far as like inheritance for your child. Gives you the ability to file for benefits on behalf of your child, and then, of course, access to education and making decisions about education. So, one option, I'm going to talk about adoption briefly. There are three types of adoption in Louisiana. The first one is intra-family, so that is within the same family. So, this envisions adoption by a family member. That can be a family member by blood, adoption, or affinity. Affinity basically means marriage. Um, Most frequently, we see this as a step-parent adoption. Um, this has certainly been used by many married same-sex couples in Louisiana in order to get the non-biological or not the parent who did not give birth to the child onto the birth certificate and officially adopted so that they have exactly equal rights to the child and to parenting. The limits with this is that it has to be that couple would need to be married, legally married. They have to be married post Obergefell, so after 2015. The other parent, if there is one, so it can get complicated with assisted reproduction with sperm donors, all of that. But if there is another parent affiliated, especially, then they have to either consent to this adoption or have their rights terminated by a court. The person who is doing the adopting must do background checks. You have to check what is called the putative father registry. This is essentially a registry in Louisiana of unmarried fathers who want to assert their rights despite perhaps not being on the birth certificate or having the legal tie. There is also the home study that has to be done. That has to be done for any type of adoption. And that is essentially just making sure that, the home is safe for the child. There's also a requirement that the person seeking adoption has had physical custody, so has physically, been living with and caring for the child for at least 6 months. Um, this has been applied inconsistently across jurisdictions in Louisiana. There have been a couple big cases in the last couple years. There was a big one in 2024 that you can find some interesting articles about. I know WWNO did a big article about that. Um, but there have been a few cases where courts have been inconsistent about whether they believe that the presumption that the husband is the father of the child, the husband of the mother is the father of the child. Sometimes they'll take that to mean, oh, well, the same-sex spouse, we're just going to refer to them as the husband, even though, they're not a man. Some courts will do that and will say, oh, you don't even need an adoption because you already have this presumption, you're on the birth certificate. Other courts do not agree, and they will allow you to do an intra-family adoption. Some courts have also brought up this idea that an intra-family adoption is not available in these scenarios because the person is not a step parent. They're saying basically that a step parent is someone who, after the child was born, then married the parent of that child. So it doesn't quite apply. It really depends on which jurisdiction you're in. So if you are looking to uh, file for an intrafamily adoption, you may want to do some research and talk to a lawyer in your parish about how they are treating these in that scenario. Other types of adoption, there's agency adoption and private adoption. So, agency adoptions, the agency in question is the Department of Children and Family Services. This is a foster to adopt process. You also need to do the home study, background checks, etc. This is available to individuals and married couples. There is no prohibition or anything about whether that married couple is heterosexual, same-sex couple, anything in between. Um, so there is no ban on that. So this is, supposed to be available to everybody. And through an agency adoption, so through DCFS, it is free. There's no fees with that, but you are signing up to foster initially with, potentially getting to adoption. With a private adoption, these often go through private agencies, which can charge fees, can be expensive. This is usually where it's a non-family member seeking to adopt. You have to do the home studies, background checks, etc. And this is also available to both individuals and married couples to file jointly. Surrogacy. Louisiana is not very pro surrogacy. We are, I think, one of the most restrictive states in the country when it comes to surrogacy. You are only able to have a legally recognized surrogacy in Louisiana in extremely limited circumstances, only where the intended parents are a married couple that is a man and a woman, and where the intended parents have provided the egg and sperm that are used. So the surrogate is gestational only. It's not the surrogate's egg that's being used. Um, there are most other states in the country are more pro surrogacy. They have more options for it. So looking at out-of-state surrogacy may be an option, but again, I would encourage folks to talk to a lawyer in Louisiana about that to make sure that whatever you do in another state is going to be recognized in Louisiana and that you don't have any major hurdles on that. All right. Now, my last section here is about domestic violence. So I've got the definition here that it includes, but is not limited to, physical or sexual abuse and any offense against the person, physical or non-physical, defined in the criminal code, committed by a family member, household member, or dating partner against another. So against another family member, household member, or dating partner. It can also include abuse towards adults when it's by an adult child or an adult grandchild. Oftentimes, we're looking at elder abuse with that. Um, One good thing about our domestic violence laws in Louisiana, number one, they're pretty strong, at least on the civil side. They're also entirely gender neutral. So these apply no matter what the situation is, as long as the relationship falls within those categories, these laws apply equally. So there are both civil and criminal protections for domestic violence. Um, on the civil side, so this is something I do a lot of, are the civil protective orders. There is a process for doing it. I've got it laid out here with the basics. But if this is available to anyone who is in fear from a household member, dating partner, spouse, child, intimate partner that you live with but aren't married to. This is available to anyone who is afraid for their safety or their children's safety because of abuse. Um, you do not have to have reported it to the police. There does not have to be a criminal charge to go with it. There are no real requirements for it except that you have to list out the reasons you're seeking protection and what has happened to make you need protection. And then you have to follow the process. So it involves filling out a petition for protection from abuse. These are actually uniform forms across the state. They're provided by the Louisiana Protective Order Registry, which is under the umbrella of the Supreme Court. So these forms should be available in the clerk's office of any civil or domestic court across the state. Usually that's going to be the judicial district courts for most parishes. So they should have these petitions available for you if you need one. They can't necessarily help you fill out the paperwork, but they can provide it. So you fill out and file that petition. Ideally, you receive a temporary restraining order that goes into effect right away, before you even leave the courthouse, and it comes with a court date. You have to have the other party served with the paperwork, and then there's a hearing where the person seeking protection has to put on their case for why they need protection, and basically talk about the history of abuse. Um, a civil protective order can then be granted. They can be good for up to 18 months, although there are some provisions that can be made permanent. So that is on the civil side. You don't have to have an ongoing criminal case to do that. On the criminal side, this is just the brief definition of domestic abuse battery, which is our main domestic violence criminal statute in Louisiana. The intentional use of force or violence committed by one household member or family member upon the person of another household member or family member. Again, fully gender neutral. Um, and typically, this is not the case in all scenarios, but typically when one of these is, when someone is charged with domestic abuse battery, there will be what's called a Gwen's Law hearing within a few days, to essentially have a cooling off period for the person who's been arrested. And then usually before setting bail, the court will issue a criminal stay away order. Saying that the perpetrator is not allowed to, or the accused is not allowed to go back to the home or go near the protected person until the case is resolved. So some other domestic violence resources, there are a lot of them. We have the Louisiana Coalition Against Domestic Violence with the website there. They have lists of all of the programs in the state. They've got a ton of resources on there. And most parishes are going to have either their own or be covered by one in another parish, a domestic violence program that has free services, shelter, and other programs. Also, it's important to know if you are in a domestic violence situation, that can impact how child custody is handled. I didn't get into that in the custody part, but I would highly recommend that anyone who is dealing with a custody issue, a custody battle in court, if there has been domestic violence, you should talk to a lawyer about how that can affect things. So here at the end, I've got a list of resources. These are all Louisiana specific. So all of these websites have a ton of information. They're updated frequently. They can help you figure out what your legal issue is if you're not sure. The free legal answers one, you can ask questions and a pro bono attorney will answer your question for free. It's not immediate, but eventually they will answer it. The Law Library of Louisiana has a ton of resources as well. And then DCFS does have an adoption navigator website that could be helpful. So I think I have crammed everything into my 30 minutes. I don't know if there's any questions or comments.
Molly, you did a fantastic job. That was a phenomenal overview, and I'm going to open it up for questions. All right. You did a fantastic job. Thank you so much again for sharing your time and talent and expertise with us. As a reminder, this video will be available on the forum's website, and we hope that you will all remember that this is not legal advice, but this is legal information that we're providing. Molly, from the forum and from me personally, thank you so much. We appreciate it. And we hope to see all of you again next month at our next Know Your Rights webinar.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks, y'all.